I'd like to welcome everyone to Humanitini, sponsored by the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. My name is Jay Stewart. I'm the program director. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight. I'd like to thank our hosts, Busboys and Poets. I'd like to thank Alicia Bird, Denisha Bullock, Patrick Bonesteel and AJ Head for their patience and help in putting this together. I'd also like to thank Steve Kolb, our videographer, and Channel 16. I'd also like to thank and recognize the HumanitiesDC staff who are in attendance today, starting on my right, your left, with Stephanie Scott, our office administrator. Jasper Collier, who's head of our digital museum and is also executive assistant to our director. Lewis Hicks, who's our grant manager, standing over there. And I'd also like to thank two of our interns here from the University of California, starting with Christian Lopez over there on the side. And Cesar Hernandez, sorry, standing right here in the front, recording. I'd also like to recognize the honorary committee supporting this 225th anniversary celebration. The honorary committee consists of the mayor, the entire DC Council, DC Public Library Director Richard Reyes Gavilan, DC Archivist Rebecca Katz, Historical Society Director John Swal, Cultural Tourism DC Director Steve Shulman, DC Preservation League Director Rebecca Miller, and DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities Director Arthur Espinoza Jr. Finally, I'd like to recognize our sponsors, Busboys and Poets again, also DC Brow, and A Creative DC. HumanitiesDC is an independent nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency in charge of supporting the humanities throughout the United States. HumanitiesDC is an essential part of the district's effort to provide quality humanities-related programs that preserve Washington's cultural legacy and promote civic engagement in every neighborhood in DC. This year marks the 225th anniversary of the founding of the District of Columbia. As part of the celebration, starting in January and continuing monthly for the rest of the year, we are holding panel discussions of scholars and contemporary commentators to discuss the highlights of a series of 20-year periods in the history of the district and to link the events of the past to present-day issues and concerns of district residents. HumanitiesDC hopes to illuminate the often overlooked local history of the nation's capital and to define aspects of a unique contemporary culture of the district. Given the cultural and economic changes taking place in this city, we believe that reflecting on what our history has to teach us about the present is both timely and important. So I'd like to recognize our panelists and also today's topic. I would also like to recognize one of our board members in the audience, Monica Scott. So today we're talking about DC as a place of protest. And as you might know, protest in DC spans long before the 1960s. So beginning with our historian today, I would like to recognize Glenn Marcus, who is a documentarian. Sorry, go ahead. Mr. Marcus has done a documentary about one of the major protests that took place in DC history, the Bonus March of the 1930s. So we're going to have a chance to watch a short video, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that historical time period. Moving up 30 years to the 1960s, we have Dory Ladner. Who is a veteran of the march and will share her experiences from that time period. And then we conclude in today with Parisa Neruzzi, the executive director of Empower DC, which sometimes protests today. Will tell us a little bit about that. And finally, I'd like to recognize our moderator, Dr. Cherie Ward, a recent PhD recipient from Howard University and a professor at the University of the District of Columbia, and I'll turn the microphone over to her. Sorry, Doctor. Before I do, I have to do two housekeeping matters. The first one is I would like to recognize Lewis Hicks, our grant manager, who will tell you a little bit about our grant-making program.
Thanks, Jay. We have currently, we're in the process of managing Who's a Washingtonian, which brings together two communities that may not necessarily be in connection with one another. It's around a humanities topic or a humanities theme. The grant program provides $5,000 over the course of a year for groups to explain a story about DC. Who's a Washingtonian basically will allow organizations, particularly those that are nonprofit, to tell their story. We are interested in capturing preservation stories as well as individual stories. We have a grant cycle that starts at the beginning of the year, and that is our cycle 1, which provides for funding in our major, our small, and the soul of the city, which we are currently wrapping up. Jay is the coordinator for DC, Humanities, Soul of the City. But we also allow 3 organizations to get funding for $10,000 in which they teach leadership skills through the humanities using approximately 20 students as a minimum for that program. You do an initial submission of a preliminary application for the major and the soul of the city application. The small grant that we award is up to $1,500. That submission deadline for all 3 is the beginning of March of each year. We also have a program of the DC Community Heritage Project, which is a 6-month program. For about $2,500, you get to tell a specific story or capture the preservation story of a neighborhood or of a community. That program is awarded. It starts mid-June and it ends after 6 months, and we culminate with a program in December. So if you'd like to find out more, please check out our website, which is www.humanitiesdc.org.
Thank you, Louis. The other housekeeping matter is that we do have a raffle, so if you guys have not picked up a ticket, please be sure to do so with Stephanie Scott before the end of the program. And then one last thing, I just wanted to recognize one of our partners, George Cook from the Center for the Creative Economy. George is part of our network of people working on the DC Cultural Plan, which was recently launched by the DC Council. So I just wanted to mention that. Dr. Ward, I apologize. Hand back the microphone to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Humanitini. You mean it's Thursday night, and that's the best you can do? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Humanitini. Now that's much better. Humanitini is a celebration where we interact with the audience. So our panelists speak for 5 minutes. My job is to give them time cues. But after that, we invite you to join in the discussion. So please participate. This is a party with a purpose. Y'all feeling me? Make sure you have a Humanitini, because it's not a party without a Humanitini. So at this time, I'm going to call up our first speaker, Mr. Glenn Marcus.
This documentary was funded initially by the DC Humanities Council, which started it all off and ended up on PBS National Primetime. So my partner and I are most grateful for that. It's just be a very short clip.
In the summer of 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, an impoverished army of 45,000 World War I veterans marched on Washington, D.C.
They believed that if they came to Congress, that Congress would finally authorize immediate payment of bonds that they had been promised for the losses that they suffered during World War I.
But Congress refused to pay the bonus, and the Army brutally drove the veterans away.
It's war, the greatest concentration of fighting troops in Washington since 1865.
This is the saga of the Bonus Army, and a march that changed the nation.
Remember my forgotten man.
All right, I'm just going to give a very brief précis of some of the marches, how it all started. Sometimes when you say March on Washington, people think of the British coming in 1814 to burn down the Capitol, which, by the way, as some of you know, was in retaliation for our troops burning the capital of Canada at the time, which was York. Subsequently, General Jubal Early marched on Washington, the Confederate general, and they were stopped at the Battle of Fort Stevens. And if you haven't been to Fort Stevens at Quackenbush and 13th Streets Northwest, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful site. The first march that's generally considered to be of this type was Coxey's Army in 1894. There were only 500 members of it. They were a ragtag group of farmers and others who came from around the country demanding, actually the biggest deal was infrastructure. They needed roads to get their produce to market, et cetera, and other demands. They came to the Capitol. They were immediately arrested because that was illegal. Then, of course, you had the suffragists who were demonstrating between 1917 and 1920. And in 1924, there was actually a march. Maybe some of you have seen this astonishing picture. The KKK marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, many of them in hoods and capes. But let's just go right up to 1932. The veterans of World War I in 1924 had been promised a bonus. The bonus was called adjusted compensation. When soldiers go to war, they lose money compared to those who stay behind, and the soldiers asked for it. Congress gave it to them, but it wouldn't be paid until 1945. And the veterans called it a tombstone bonus, because they'd get it if they died, but they'd also get it if they lived until 1945. The Depression then came. They were desperate. They asked for the bonus to be paid earlier, paid in 1932, not 1945. About 25,000 of them came here to Washington and obviously the right of assembly, the right to petition, constitutional rights was part of it. They also lobbied. They went into the offices of congressmen. Lobbying had typically before been done by the special interest groups, and there was a lot of cartoons of the well-dressed lobbyists standing next to bedraggled soldiers also trying to convince their congressmen to do this piece of legislation. In May of 1932, they were here. In June, the House passed the bill, but the Senate did not. And the congressmen adjourned and escaped through gates and tunnels because they didn't want to have to confront the marchers who were surrounding Washington. The marchers had been marching all through Washington. They had a lot of public support. And after it wasn't, the marchers stayed, a lot of them. Partially, they had no place to go. A lot of them were homeless. They were, in a sense, hobos. So they stayed, but everyone knew they had to leave. President Hoover ordered the Army to come and clear them out after there was an incident which sort of triggered it. And the Army came. They cleared out the downtown encampments, which were where the Federal Triangle is now, and on the mall. And they pushed them towards a large encampment in Anacostia, very large. If you cross the 11th Street Bridge into Anacostia, there's a field. That's where they were. There were about 12,000 people. They had built homes. There was a library. There was music. It was a little city, little Hooverville, if you will, that they had constructed. And Hoover did not want MacArthur to cross the bridge. MacArthur did what he wanted to do, and he was being handed a note by a messenger from the White House, and he just said, "I don't have time for pieces of paper and times of war." He marched across the bridge with his troops, and they rushed everyone out of the Hooverville and burned it to the ground. So that was the end of the bonus marchers in 1932. Subsequently, they came back in 1933. FDR was elected, and Eleanor went down and talked to them. Once again, the bill didn't fail. They stayed, a few more stayed, and then finally in 1937, over FDR's veto, the bonus was paid. And it was a huge deal because it allowed a lot of these people to buy houses, to start businesses. It was huge. A little disruptive in the South because the bonus army was an integrated army, which threatened a lot of people. And one reason why the army was brought out was the bonus army was considered by their intelligence, and this is a quote, commies, many of whom are Jews and Negroes. In fact, there were very few commies, and the police had to separate the commies from most of the marches because the regular marchers were beating the crap out of them. So they got the bonus in 1937, and in the GI Bill, when they were thinking about all the troops who come home from World War II, Roosevelt said, quote, FDR, we can't have another bonus army. and they passed the GI Bill of Rights, which, as you know, allowed for GI housing, GI college education, all sorts of other benefits for the GIs who came home. So the bonus army itself was extremely successful and set the tone for later marches. Thank you.
Come on now, it's a party. Give them a little more than that. There you go. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, Jay mentioned that I recently got my doctorate from Howard and that I teach at the University of the District of Columbia. But you know, we're here to talk about the history of the District of Columbia. Well, I'm a former Miss District of Columbia, 1985, believe it or not. So I'm part of the history. I'm also a performance poet in town, so tonight you're going to get a little bit of poetry at the end. Like I said, this is a celebration, so come to the stage. Up next, we have Miss Parisa Naruzi. Oh, Miss Ladner's going to go next? Okay, pardon me. Our next speaker is going to be Miss Dory Ladner, a native Washingtonian and who has been a part of the movement, so please enjoy her presentation. Miss Ladner.
What a delight to be here tonight with the Humanities Council. And as I was looking at the bonus march, a lot of the images were going through my head. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Yes. A lot of images were going through my head, brutality of all sorts, but that didn't stop anything. The reason I'll give you a little texture about my background. I'm a native Mississippian who was born and reared in Mississippi, and I started out protesting in 1961 at Jackson State College in support of the Tuvalu 9 students who attempted to sit in the public library in Jackson, Mississippi, tutored by the late Medgar Wiley Evers, NAACP State Field Secretary. So I got my bearings from him starting at the age of 14 after Emmett Till was murdered. I come from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. But to get to the March on Washington, we're leaping quite a lot. I had the occasion to go to Greenwood, Mississippi, where the late Pete Seeger and Theodore Bickel and young men whom you all may know now by the name of Bob Dylan were all there in Greenwood, and they were performing. And they performed in a big field. And at that particular time, we also had the luxury of going north to a retreat. Medgar Evers had been murdered on June 12th, and it was such a horrendous time for us. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer had been beaten. Lawrence Gilliard, the late Lawrence Gilliard, had been brutalized in the jail of Winona, Mississippi. And all these things had culminated, and we were still in stages of anticipation and trying to get our bearings. But an offer came to say that we were going to send you north. And when I got the opportunity to go north, we went to New York City and stayed in the home of Rochelle Horowitz at West 24th and 8th Avenue. And at that particular juncture, Rochelle and the late Viad Rustin were, along with Tom Kahn, were actually organizing the March on Washington. And it was right there in that co-op building at 24th and 8th. It's the Chelsea district. And I was there with my sister Joyce, and Eleanor Holmes Norton came up, John Lewis came up. We all shared Eleanor's apartment. And I worked in the SNCC office, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee office. But to make a long story short, we were going back south to the March on Washington. And I had been out of the state of Mississippi 2 times, one to California and one to Chicago. And this was my 3rd time coming out and anticipating coming to the March on Washington. And that particular morning when we got here, it was like, oh my God. But I'll digress because we had to go and picket the Justice Department. We had 3 young men on death row in Georgia, okay? And we picketed the Justice Department and came back up went to the Lincoln Memorial, and it was the biggest stage that one could perform on. I mean, it was actually a theater at its best. Dr. Martin Luther King, Harry Belafonte, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Joan Baez, all of these young people were there, Lena Horne, and Dr. King was speaking, but I didn't really know him that well. I was talking to Dick Gregory's wife and the two older children, Lynn and Michelle, and I heard this roar that kept roaring and roaring, and I got up to peep around, and when I saw the people roaring, and I went and looked over, peeped over, it was Dr. King, and I said, oh my God. I had seen him once or twice, but I had not heard him in this kind of oratory at that height. So I was pleased to be part of that theater. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ladden. Y'all having a good time? Come on, y'all having a good time? I did notice that when she came up, someone said, woo, woo. That's what I'm talking about. That's what you do at a party. So our next speaker is now Ms. Parisa Neruzzi.
Good evening, everybody. For the PowerPoint? Oh, okay. Okay, well, first of all, those last 5 minutes were the quickest I've ever seen, because both of you guys, I was riveted with what you were saying, so I'm looking forward to hearing more. My name is Parisa. I'm the director of Empower DC, which is a grassroots organization here in DC fighting to stop the displacement of low-income people in our city in particular. We were founded in 2003, and we essentially exist to build power, political power, among low and moderate income DC residents. And the topic of tonight being how public protest has changed over the last 100 years in DC. I've been ruminating on this, and honestly, one of my beliefs is that it hasn't changed that much. I mean, we might look at things like social media and think, oh, this is revolutionizing things, but as community organizers, the work does not change. It's one-on-one, it's relationship building, it's knocking on doors, it's, you know, meeting after meeting after meeting, and providing opportunities for people to develop their confidence to speak out at greater levels of power. You know, and I think it's important for us to think about why we protest. Protest is confrontation, right? So we do all the other things first. We write letters, we testify at hearings, we participate in all the way, we vote, you know, we participate in all the civic engagement things that we're supposed to do, right? And we're ignored, systematically discriminated against, because the system has been designed to perpetuate itself. So we may engage in those processes, but those processes actually weren't created for us. And that's when you have to go outside of the box and disrupt those processes or confront those decision makers. And that's where we find ourselves often today. There's you can scroll through them. There's, you know, a few very known people who have things to say about confrontation, and I think they're good for us to remind ourselves, because of course these are still true statements, right? So power concedes nothing without demand. We're not going to just you know, be able to say, please change the capitalist system and turn wealth inequality on its head and have that happen immediately. You can move to the next one. So, you know, what is challenging power really look like? That's not something that comes lightly. Dr. King saying that non-cooperation with evil is as much of a moral obligation. Non-cooperation, what does that mean? Protest, you know? So we may sit in a meeting or a hearing, and the stuff that's always happening continues to happen. At what point do we stand up and disrupt that meeting or hearing from even taking place? So non-cooperation, to me, that's another form of protest. The next one. This quote I always like, because a lot of times our members feel very demoralized and frustrated by the process, where, you know, we're often laughed at. You know, oh, those people, they just hate all development. They don't want any progress. You know, they're just troublemakers. All they do is be confrontative. But there is a system where you realize after time that you're winning, because once they start fighting you, you know, this is the process. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and often that means you're winning, and then you win. The next one, just again, talking about the importance of confronting the oppressor. So going into our organizing principles just quickly, the next slide, you can see that we work with people who are directly impacted by social, racial, economic, and environmental injustice. And on the next slide, you'll see that one of our, the red one, one of our organizing principles is using confrontation when necessary. So again, we believe that as the building block of social change, we want to support individual people who have been marginalized by the system to develop their political power and their personal confidence with engaging in the arenas where decisions are being made. So that may be testifying at city council for the first time or participating here and there. And then when we realize that those systems, again, are systematically ignoring us, that's when we use confrontation when necessary. And just to get very briefly into the crisis that we face here in the city, you can change the slide. We face a displacement crisis. You can keep going in the slides. We lost 40,000 African Americans in only 10 years' time in our city, and that's really just, you know, it may be an impressive number, but it says nothing of the real impact of displacement in our city. It's devastating, and you know that again, that says it lightly. Go to the next slide. So we have institutions in our city that are doing things like this, which is called a space finding tour, where developers pay money to get on a bus and drive through people's neighborhoods to look for space to develop. So even though this is their homes, right? And obviously this is very offensive to a lot of people who live in these communities. So this was last year where they went through the Berry Farm community, a public housing community in Ward 8, which is very historic, and members blocked the bus. And then this year, go to the next slide, we did it again, but this year you do see a little bit more the impact of social media. So there was some live streaming on Facebook, there was a lot of Twitter and Instagram, and so it got picked up by more and more people. So these are other people's Instagram and tweets about it. This is a picture, this is blocking the bus in the middle of Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. You can go to the next slide. And they ended up inviting us to write an editorial in the Business Journal about why we blocked the bus. The other thing that's happened since then is the group that sponsors the bus tours has now met with us a couple times and is not 100% backed off of them, but is considering not doing them anymore. They are starting to ask us, well, what is it that we should be doing? And in those conversations, realizing, and I will close it on this, how little they know, because they are not working with the people or talking with the people or concerned about the people who are directly impacted by any of this. So again, why we must protest. Thank you.
Oh yeah, there you go, a few more woo-woos. So at this time, we're going to ask our panelists to transition to the stage, and this is where we invite our audience to join into the conversation. So I hope you have some great comments, some great questions, and they are transitioning to the stage. And again, my job is just to keep us in timely order and on time, so I hope you are enjoying your cocktails and your meals. And now we will go to our Q&A. Jay Stewart will come around with this mic, and we'll get the discussion started.
Lucy, you want to get that microphone?
Okay, so who's going to ask our first question? There we are, right there.
Yeah, I've heard it said that when you see protesters blocking traffic and things like that, that it angers people in the community and you're blocking their way to get home and all this stuff, and that you're causing more enemies than friends. Is that the case? If you're causing people to not like you, does it still serve the purpose anyway because you get someone else's attention, or what's that dynamic like?
We had a protest recently
Pick it up.
in Cleveland Park. There was another group that we were in solidarity with that was protesting a slum landlord, right? So he lives in a very ritzy neighborhood, really beautiful $1 million+ home. But he manages a property in Southeast where people have no hot water, where they have, pest infestation, where their ceilings are falling down. And so the protesters went to the landlord's house and they ultimately blocked traffic on, I guess that's Wisconsin Avenue. And there was a few people who were yelling and saying how horrible it was. I got places to go. I have children. And my organizer, Skyla, who was there leading part of the march, was saying, we have kids too, We have kids living in these conditions. I don't think, my perspective is that we don't make enemies through those actions. That people either, they probably wouldn't have been on our side to begin with. And I think that there is real truth to the fact that there's not going to be any social progress without some people's comfort being disturbed. And whether or not that particular moment transformed their way of thinking about whether or not, they supported us, it certainly made them think about it. I'm sure that person thought about her response into the night and into the next day. I'm sure that her voice and her face did not leave that person's mind very quickly, so.
For those of us who were trained in the nonviolence way of life, we know that Mahatma Gandhi made a lot of people very uncomfortable in the very beginning. And I can't think of all the phrases that Dr. King and others would say at this particular juncture, very eloquent statements, but if someone is standing on your toe, you have to get them off. And meaning that if your roof is leaking and water is coming down, mildew is forming, you got to seek redress. The reason we came to Washington, D.C., and the reason most people come to Washington, D.C., is because this is the seat of government. You come to have your needs addressed, your grievances addressed. And there may be discomfort. But in the long run, I think that the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Bill, and all these bills were passed as a result of protest. The bonus march and everything else had been passed because of protests. Anti-Vietnam War, everything has come about as a result of protests.
Just one quick moment of the bonus army. The bonus marchers marched all over the city, and people came out to see them and support them. There was a lot less traffic then, so the disruptions were not nearly as great. The big disruptions, as some of you remember, in 1971, the Vietnam protests, where the idea was to stop everything, block streets, block bridges, and all that. It was pretty intense, as you know. But I'm going to take this opportunity just to say that the Bonus Army, this book is what inspired us, the Bonus Army, an American epic, and also Lucy Barber, who was the first person that wrote the book Marching on Washington, and it's been reissued with a new introduction. So I'd encourage you all to consider those volumes. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Oh, come on. There we have a hand in the back. Can you take a mic? And stand up, please, when you ask your question directly into the microphone. As you heard Jace mention, we are filming this.
Good evening. I'm Marvin Jones, Jawan Discovery Group. Mr. Marcus, I'd like for you to tell us about the fatalities and casualties when MacArthur pushed the bonus marchers into Barry Farms in 1932.
Amazingly enough, there were two casualties in a confrontation on the mall where a policeman shot someone who had thrown a brick at him, and this is what allowed the Army to come in. They were just waiting for some provocation, and they came in. But because the Bonus Army marchers a lot of them were gassed, which is, I mean, think about it. These guys have been gassed in the trenches in France, and the tear gas was used. I mean, it's just unthinkable. And the soldiers couldn't believe it themselves, the veterans. But they were warned that the troops were coming across the bridge. So they were ready to flee. So in fact, there was only one casualty. A baby died And it was not, it's still to this day not clear, was that caused was he asphyxiated by the smoke, or was he ill anyway? Because had actually been born in the Bonus Army camp. So it's astonishing. Let me just add that in the 1968 Chicago Convention, which you've all seen the things where people had their heads cracked, but it was a police riot. It's amazing that no one died at that thing. People lost eyes. I was there. People lost eyes. People had skull fractures, and no one died. So it's just interesting the way these things can play out.
Weren't there tanks stationed? Didn't MacArthur have tanks ready for that march as well?
He did. As you might have seen, the cavalry came first. It was the last charge of the U.S. Army, if you will. And then behind them were the troops with fixed bayonets, and behind them were the tanks. So that action that you saw was on the Mall. By the time they crossed the 11th Street Bridge in the evening against the orders of the president, there were just the troops, the horse cavalry, and the troops came behind. The tanks actually never crossed the bridge. It wasn't necessary. Everyone was fleeing. It was clear that they had, if you will, won the day, the troops.
Okay, you want to address that? Okay, we had another question over here. In the corner. We can't see you. There you go, standing up, House. That's one of our board members.
I'm surprised that nobody talked about the anti-war movement in terms of Vietnam. I was involved in an organization called Federal Employees Against the War, which was really quite unique in that here were government workers being part of the whole movement. But those were significant efforts, and I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that.
I stated that I had come to Washington and marched against the war in Vietnam and every other march that came to Washington. And I think in 1968, 67, 68, there were throngs of young people who had begun to come here to march against the Pentagon and to protest at the Capitol. And if it had not been for the marching and the buildup, the war would not have climaxed as fast as it did under Nixon, because you have to have a lot of pressure, added pressure against. It's a moral obligation there that goes along with this. Are we going to continue having young people die, or are you going to do something about it? So you mentioned the 68 convention. I can remember all of that when Abby Hoffman and a lot of people whom I knew at the time were being beaten and brutalized because we'd been to the 64 Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey, asking that we be seated in the seats of the all-white delegation who had come from Mississippi. We were disenfranchised. We could not vote. And so when we came and Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer presented her testimony before the Credentials Committee, she was cut off. But when we came back in 1968, we went to Chicago, and all hell broke loose under Governor Daley, Mayor Daley at the time. But the Democratic Party did straighten itself out after that. We were not allowed to vote in the state of Mississippi, and suppression is rearing its ugly head, but thank God I think that courts have ruled against this at this particular juncture.
Okay, Marcus.
Right. I think one of the points is that the 1963 March for Jobs and Freedom had authorized the use of the public spaces on the Mall for demonstrations. And as you know, having been a veteran of them as I was as well, there were marches in 67, 66, 70, and 71 was the one, as I mentioned, where they decided they were going to do serious civil action and try to shut the city down and shut down the military-industrial establishment, as it were. So indeed, of course, this all we've been talking about led up to those tumultuous times. And subsequently, of course, there were a lot of marches and a lot of demonstrations pro-life, et cetera. And of course, the amazing Million Man March was also an example of using that public space. I just want to say one thing. Ms. Ladner mentioned the performance element of it, and that was a part of it. And it started in a way with the Bonus Army. They had songs. They had many. They had trucks that had displays on them, and subsequently, all marches had some form, and as you probably remember, there would be things at the marches that were performance art to add an extra dimension to the activism.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my question is for Ms. Ladner. I actually resigned from the NAACP after 10 years of tenure, and so I was actually groomed by your colleagues prior to working there, and then even now.
Where?
In the NAACP national headquarters. So my question to you is, looking at the movement today, could you name something, like one thing that you like or that you feel was done in your time and that it's effective, and then one thing that you really would just trash, like something that you want to see changed, if you could sit and say, listen, this is how I want it done or how it should be done?
Well, I knew many people who were murdered as a result of attempting to register to vote, and we did get the right to vote. That was done, and another thing, we came to the Congress and to the White House and to the Capitol for jobs and freedom during the '63 March on Washington, and we had a lot of labor support. But I'm not going to tread into that area right now because it's kind of shaky. But I would like to see more jobs available. But I can't think of anything that I really want to throw away at this point, because we're in a reconstruction period as we continue. We're continuously in reconstruction.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand here, and then, well, since it's closest, we'll go right there, and then to you, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lee Glenn. I have an impression of I've never taken part in a march, but I do write letters. I write to my representatives and so forth. But there seems to be this sort of split between professional activism, I'm not sure if that's even the way to call it, and the rest of people who may or may not get involved in some way. So I'm just wondering if, how more people can be encouraged, because my impression of the time, Ms. Ladner, when you were living, is like people had full-time jobs, but the rest of the time they were dedicated, so they would take whatever off hours in addition to child rearing and all of that to spend the time and be involved. So I'm just wondering what people today can be encouraged to do, because obviously there's so much at stake and things seem very much more complex today, is my impression.
Oh, okay, so I'd like all of the panelists to address this, and we'll start with Ms. Ladner.
Well, first of all, I'm still alive. And also, there were letter writers during the particular period that you're referring to, and people still write letters. Everybody's not an activist. I can almost count on both hands and feet the number of real activists who were out there during the 60s.
I just would say everybody should join an organization. It doesn't mean you have to be on the front lines. It doesn't mean you have to lead the protest march. Every organization needs people in a mix of roles. The organization could be a protest movement organization, but it could be your church, your tenant association, your civic association. We have to be organized at the most local level, even for us to participate in the movement, from my perspective. The movement is all of the many organizations and, sort of configurations of people coming together at key times. So, and I think that part of what I hear you saying is there has been a decline in just membership organizations in general. So maybe you need to start a neighborhood or block party or something.
Right. One thing to do is to get on a lot of lists for a lot of organizations, the kind of activist organizations. I'll give you a quick example. I got something, there was a protest against the TPP. And it was lunchtime, and I happened to be in the area, so I just went and demonstrated. So part of it is just being aware of the plethora of opportunities to stand up and be counted.
Okay, we're going to this lady here, then in the back.
When people are up against a lot of hate, it can be very natural to become what you're against and hate. How do you keep your balance? How do you keep your compassion? How do you keep your sense of peace?
Okay, we're going to start with Marcus and come down this time.
Well, that's of course an individual matter, and I'm old enough that I just relax and say whatever happens, happens, but you just have to look exactly and try to stay calm and try not to react, and you're exactly right, not to become what you're opposed to. But sometimes organizations have done well. I was actually covering the Cleveland Convention, and both the Black Lives Matter / the remnants of the Black Panthers had a rally, and then the Bikers for Trump and the gun owners for Trump had a rally before the convention started, and they both sent out notices to their friends, it's open carry in Ohio, don't bring guns. So most of them didn't. So it's just amazing that the restraint can happen in many, many forms. So yes, it's a very good question, and it's very, very hard because passions run high. And as we know, particularly now, what we think of as logic is trumped. I'm sorry, I can't believe Trump is trumped by powerful emotional and visceral reactions, and that's because we're humans and we're tribal.
My approach is to focus on finding the people who agree with me and getting us organized. So I do not spend a lot of time debating people who have alternate views. I mean, I do, help to bring new information to people, and maybe that conversation is a process of finding out if the person agrees. But again, I don't have the temperament. I'm not the right person to try to debate somebody who has, opposing views. My mom is the type of person who can do that kind of thing. My focus, and I think it kind of keeps me sane, is just, my role is finding the people who generally agree, but maybe haven't been asked to participate or haven't been brought some of that information, and getting us organized.
Again, I go back to the spirit of nonviolence, from which I come from. I never wanted to become a part of the individual that I saw in front of me that could make me want to hate them. I don't want to hate anyone, and I've been confronted with a lot of situations, but I will never stoop to that level. I will turn and walk away before I can get to that level. Because you're ineffective if you become part of what you're trying to change.
Okay, yeah, give her some applause. Our panelists are doing a wonderful job. Don't you think so? Okay, we had some questions over here. The lady here, and then the gentleman in the back.
I have a comment. I'm Janet Harris. I was in a 1960 sit-in movement in Louisiana, jailed and expelled from college, expelled from the state. So I kind of feel what Ms. Ladin is saying here. After the 60s movement, when I came to Washington, there was a concerted effort to bring blacks and whites together in community settings, in social settings, to discuss issues. And that sort of eased the tension. I know that Martin Luther King said, hate cannot change hate, only love can change hate. But I think that in this day and time, people have a tendency to separate. I don't care where you go, to a restaurant, to wherever, blacks sit on one side, whites sit on the other. There's not this, they don't feel the need to sit and talk to each other or to meet each other. And I think that's what's missing now. You mentioned about speaking up. I think the other thing is that we don't speak up when we see things. We try to keep from getting involved, as we say. But I think that we need to be individual freedom fighters. You know what I'm saying? We need to see it. When you see something happening, we need to deal with it. And we need to spend more time bringing together the younger people so that we can see a change as we move through our future. But I think that that's really what I see.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, give it up for her, y'all. Like I said, this is a party with a purpose. Sir.
To go along with Ms. Narusi about joining an organization, I see a lot of comments on social media about injustice, and I get tired of it, and I find the surest way to get people to shut up or put up is to, is to pick out an organization and its website, Southern Poverty Law Center, National Organization of Women, put out that website, NAACP.org, and I just write, donate to the NAACP.org. Because a lot of people, we need to have these organizations' websites in our head to be able to give it to people that are concerned. Empower DC, their website. Repeat your website's address.
It's empowerdc.org.
So if you want to go along with Ms. Narusi, if you want to do like President Obama, who 8 days ago said, don't boo, vote. Don't boo, join www.naacp.org, empowerdc.org, southernpovertylawcenter.org, larasa. Have that website already in your head. And also, give them the price of the meal and a drink here. You know, the price of what it costs here to have a meal and a drink, you can afford to also continue to eat here and donate to those organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Come on now. We need some more questions and comments. We have all these people in the room and only a few people are brave enough to join the discussion. Can I get a hand up? Well, then I'm going to direct a question to the panel. We've talked about various marches. I'd like all of you to address how you've seen change in the approach towards activism through rallies and marches over the years. We'll start with you, Marcus.
Well, forgive me, I don't want to steal any thunder from Joyce, the great Joyce Ladner, but I'm sorry, Dory. Joyce is someone else. Sorry, please edit that out of the video. Thank you very much. 68 years old, the memory goes. In any case, when I attended the 63 Civil Rights March when I was 15, and remember very well that there was a tremendous effect in the white community about seeing that there was this gathering, a tremendous gathering of individuals, peaceful, incredible entertainment, and of course the amazing I Have a Dream speech. So the effects of that were palpable. So that's my fondest personal memory. I also participated in the Vietnam demonstrations, but it was a little bit more diffuse in terms of any effects.
I mean, I think my observation is that a lot of the national level and local level organizing hasn't changed that much. I mean, I think that the use of social media is more or less just to, share information. You have access to information. But when it really sparks mobilization, you can't predict that, I don't feel like. I don't feel like that has really been a result of an organization that's building up for a national march and then, social media takes off. So it's really just a matter of the collective consciousness was pricked by some event, and it's up to us as organizers to try to harness that energy that then gets generated and direct people, because it often indicates that there was an event that radicalized a lot of people or politicized a lot of people. Something happened that got through to them and they went to their first march or whatever. And so what did we do as organizers to harness that and then guide people into organizations and because the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, is not glamorous at all. I mean, it's grunt work, and a lot of people come in through social media thinking, I'm going to be a Twitter, activist. I'm going to be a star. I'm going to be a talking head on the news, whatever. And the work that we do is literally mostly unseen, So I think that will never change. That's just the nature of it.
And I will say amen. Organizing is very, very hard work. Very, very hard work. And having started out in my teen years and to look at the landscape of where we are now, as I was thinking, the first march that I realized that had such an impact that was so low-key was the Million Women March. And it was done on social media for the most part. And we were used to putting out flyers and so forth. But I'm most impressed with seeing the young people come forth in all their regalia and all their different hairstyles and lipsticks and so forth, and dancing the night away, prancing and dancing. But they don't have that much singing, and that disturbs me because the power of song is something that unites all of us. Whether we It doesn't have to be about religion, but it's a uniting force. I remember going to Highlander Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, where Dr. Martin Luther King and many others went to study as a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee field secretary in 1962. I went there and was taught a lot of the labor songs. The labor song, which side are you on? I'm going to go down by the riverside and I have messages to tell. These are songs that are carrying messages. You don't have to use your voice to make up chants and so forth, but the power of song, and it reaches out and it unites. And I would like for young people to do more of that. You don't have to do it all the time, but to let it become part of the organizing tool. I know in the churches, if we hadn't had those songs to go out and face Bullcon and all the other people, Wallace and all of them, old Wallace, and I'm about to start singing now, but but if we had not had those songs, we would not have been able to organize because people had fear, a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear. We were fearful, but with the power of the song and the momentum that was built up, the impact, it not only quelled the fear, but it also gave us another dimension from which to spring forth and to go out to that platform and to dramatize all the things that were going on, to be able to articulate them. We always said the reason we didn't write much was because we were too busy writing our own scripts and developing them and acting at the same time. We didn't have much time to do anything else. We were actors and actresses on stage, and our dramas were unfolding. But I would like to encourage young people and all the musicians to encourage young people to sing, because the songs will never go away once you put those lyrics to those songs. Those songs will last forever, because the songs I was about to tell you about were for that particular period. But we want to hear about the songs now for this period. The lyrics that you're putting into those songs, they will last forever. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from the gentleman in the yellow shirt and then the lady behind him. Isn't this a wonderful discussion? Yeah, come on, let's get a couple of woo-woops. Thank you, sir.
I think I'd like to make a comment about marches and their significance. Is that I think that for me, the March on Washington, the Million Man March, the 50th anniversary, Women's March, and one of the things that these marches did was that they brought us all together and they renewed our strength to go back to continue to organize. If I'm from Sharecroc, Arkansas, we might be a small group of us struggling every day to try to make something happen, trying to register to vote, trying to integrate a school. But when we got to an event, be it a state rally, be it a national rally, then we saw that we were not alone, that we were struggling in our communities, but this renewed us. That is the same thing in a lot of ways that music has done. And when we marched down those streets and they were yelling nigger love and stuff like that, but when we were singing, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, those kind of songs, this little light of mine, it shielded us and it continued to grow, to embrace us, to energize us. And I think national marches and even large state marches have done that and continue to do that. That they have been incredibly significant to give us the energy, the strength to go back into our small communities, to go back to that grunt work that is so hard that you figure out how do you do it every day. Because every once in a while you go someplace, you look around and you say, I'm not out here by myself. There's all these other brothers and sisters doing it also. And I think that is one of the major significance that marches have been able to do for us in our fight for justice and social justice.
Thank you, sir. Could you pass the mic to the lady?
Well said.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Stand up, please.
So to build on that last comment, maybe one of the things that I see is that the personal connections of activism and being part of organizations and movements are part of the glue that makes that activity sometimes pleasurable and something we want to keep doing and meaningful on a lot of levels. And so when those relationships are kind of stressed by internal conflict about, strategy differences or kind of turf battles or personality conflicts, that's really heartbreaking. So I'm curious, and I imagine it's inevitable in all movements and all organizations, but I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear from you all how you manage those kind of internal conflicts, advice, thoughts, anything on that front. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have all of our panelists address this, and we'll start with Ms. Ladner.
Mine is done, you hear that I'm advocating, and I'm thinking about Joan Baez's sweet voice through the power of song, through the power of music. And I do throw in B.B. King and Dylan and a whole bunch of other people in. It calms me. And the songs from the movement also calmed us. And sometimes we may be able to reach out to our comrades from the past. I feel very, very comfortable around them, and I'm sitting here now contemplating the death of our late brother Julian Bond, who died on August 12th last year. We have our ways of coping, and I couldn't begin to explain all of it to you.
I agree that all organizations are made up of relationships. People get involved in things because of relationships. People give money to things because of relationships. And I think we often don't take as much time as we should just to nurture the relationship. So, we are generally very stressed, working from one deadline to the next. We rarely interact with each other. We, meaning even our members or our board members or our other staff, outside of a meeting or a work-related function. So taking the time to incorporate, like you're talking about song, but also other types of activities where we see the humanity in each other outside of the struggle that we're involved in, I think is really important. One of the things that is a hallmark of the Black Lives Matter movement, from what I've seen, is that real focus on healing and Black joy, creating space for that purpose, for Black people in particular to interact and to be joyful and to, there's a space here in DC, Black Joy Sundays on Sunday in the park where folks just get together. And so I think I give a lot of credit to the Black Lives Matter movement that has been in the forefront, because I think that has been one of the Achilles heels of movements in the past. And we have to recognize all of the people who are part of these movements have faced a lot of trauma in their lives. And so our members, are dealing with all manner of different types of personal traumas. The other movement that's emerging is what they call the trauma-informed movement. So just looking at, we already know that people are dealing with things, but are we intentionally creating opportunities for healing? Are we, trying to work around the trauma that people have been dealing with, or are we actually trying to address it? It takes a lot of work.
I just want to say it's great to hear Ms. Ladner talk about the importance of singing, and I think we all sing less collectively than we once did, and it's a very interesting bifurcation. There's a huge explosion of a cappella singing, and of course rap and rap poetry. So, how does that all work collectively? That's one of can it work? And that's one of the questions. Also, the importance of the church as the institution, and of course behind that, religious beliefs, which can be used in many ways. In the civil rights movement, it was used tremendously. The pro-life movement also had a religious component. So there's a lot going on. Just to go back historically, back to the bonus army, it started in Portland, Oregon, with one guy, and they started coming, and the word got out, and people started coming from everywhere in the country, in part because of the shared experience. And yet, when they got together, they were all from different walks of life, but they had shared that military experience. The irony is that military experience has the great capacity to be a democratizer. Once the Army was integrated, I think we've seen some of that in our society.
Okay, we have a question right here in the front.
So all of you have mentioned the fact that these movements have brought together people from different walks of life. And I'm curious, when you think about the issues that we're facing now, either at the local or national level, who are the groups who could be working together, who should be working together, but aren't?
Okay, we're going to start from there then, Marcus.
I'll just give one quick irony from my experience covering the Cleveland Convention and recovering from it, as you might imagine. The people on the Sanders, because I went to Philadelphia as well, the Sanders people and some of the Trump people actually have a shared experience in that they are all sick and tired of a lack of the gridlock, of a lack of solutions, of the problems that beset the country. They just have different ways of approaching it. So a lot of us were talking, we actually saw people who were on each side talking in Cleveland, less so in Philadelphia, about those things and trying to see if they had any common ground. And wouldn't it be beautiful if they could find it?
There's not one thing that comes to mind. I think, just, again, it's just building relationships to find out that we have the same common purpose and trying to unite. And it just takes time. I think that's the thing that I would say is that the people who haven't taken the time to talk to each other should. Sorry.
Agree. Okay, that was short and brief. Okay, do we have any other questions, comments? Yes, in the back, and then we'll come back to the gentleman in the yellow shirt.
I mainly would like to thank all of the panelists for this really enlightening conversation, really inspiring. I'd also like to thank HumanitiesDC for making possible conversations like this. I've lived in Southwest DC for 30 years now, and when I first moved in there, I went to a DC Council event at the local library. It was a documentary film called Southwest Remembered. And I learned more about the neighborhood I was then living in from that conversation, that documentary and that conversation, than from any other source. And I've been learning about all of the neighborhoods in DC from the DC Council ever since. So I'd really like to thank them, and I'd like to thank all of you. This has been great.
Let's give them a round of applause. Come on, you can do better than that. Okay, and this gentleman in the front.
I think that the groups that ought to be talking together are seniors who have done a lot and have a lot to offer. I think that young people from all the different groups, from Black Lives Matter to all the other groups that are coming together, I think that it's important that perhaps they see us as the grandparents of Black Lives Matter and those kinds of groups. And that while we might not look at it the way you look at it, there are some experiences and some wisdom that we have that we are able to share, because oftentimes what we didn't know, we learn by doing that we can pass on. I think also that groups like labor unions ought to be at that table. I think like groups like the LGBTQ community ought to be at that table. And I think that families ought to be at that table. There are probably others, but I think if we could begin to sit around a table and have those kind of discussions, listening to each other, knowing that we don't all agree on everything, but that somebody has something that we can learn from, that this whole movement could continue to move on.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have a hand here.
And thank you as the moderator.
Oh, thank you.
You always do such a nice job.
Thank you.
One of my concerns is that recently Black Lives Matters has been a challenge for expanding its vision past the original atrocities, the pain, the hurt, and the anger of what has happened. Do you think that organizations should stay true to one mission, or should they be allowed or encouraged to expand their mission? What happened recently, and I don't know a lot about it because I only heard that there is a discussion now in the Black Lives Matter community about reparations, and that this has been an issue that has been either ignored or has never been resolved within the black community, and we all know the history of reparations. But it appears that every time a group is organized, that they want to not just take hold of one of their issues, they want to expand to talk about issues that maybe didn't have a voice before. So my question is, do you think that organizations should stay true to one mission, or should they expand their mission to other things that they are also concerned about? Because it seems there's a lot of criticism for going outside of the original mission into reparations.
That appears to be the nature of a movement. I do remember when SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, started out, we were registering people to vote, and there were some sit-ins, I think, in Nashville, Tennessee, and Freedom Riders, but it kept expanding when Julian ran for the State House in Georgia, and we put out a anti-Vietnam statement. He was denied his seat, and you kept escalating to more things. We then ran for public office. We came to Democratic conventions because we had not been allowed to register to vote, and it just kept mobilizing. So with movements, a lot of things will take place, and you can't ever predict, but I can't say how you can harness it. I wouldn't dare say.
Or should it be harnessed? Because you said it is a movement, right? Right.
My perspective is it's good to have building power as the core mission, and the issues should be dictated by the directly impacted people who are leading that organization. So sure there's, many organizations that have advocacy agenda, and it's just that one issue, and I think often that's a weakness because, it may be seen as a strength to just have this one focus and we just work on that, but it's tunnel vision because then you refuse to form the alliances because you don't want to take on that issue even though they're directly connected, and, you may not be building the base of power that would even be, needed to even really shift your own issue. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not just about getting, like, for instance, a piece of legislation passed, but the enforcement of it, the watchdogging of it, the real, cultural shift that has to take place. And so I see that what we really need is organizations whose core purpose is building power to address any of the issues. Obviously, you can't take on everything at once. Right now, our core issues relate to housing and issues of environmental justice because that's the members that we have right now who are ready to take action, and they are directly impacted, which again is really key because that's the only way that you shift power, is by changing who is being heard in decision-making rooms, right? Whose agenda is being pushed. So you also don't want to allow yourself to be co-opted, So it depends, where is that shift coming from? Is it coming from funders? Is it coming from outsiders? Is it coming from core members, directly impacted people who really represent the base of people who we need to hear more from? And just briefly, the woman in the back, we're doing a lot of work in Southwest now, and so if you're interested, but the next big push out is happening now. And so I really hope, Southwest has that history, although there's a lot of new residents who are not as familiar with it. And right now we have the largest concentration of public housing in the city is in Southwest, and all of it is at risk. So we have to really fight hard to make sure we don't repeat history. Sorry.
I'm going to tread in slightly controversial territory here. Ironically, I just read the Black Lives Matter movement did get involved in the reparations issue. But as she said, that is something that directly impacts their members or people in the community that's affected. However, in their platform they just adopted, They were, use whatever word you want, co-opted by, or certain very vociferous, very passionate members of their group passed a plank that addressed the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and they said that the Israelis were committing genocide. This has caused terrible problems. The Jewish community relations councils of all cities have a relationship with the black community, that blacks and Jews have had a long, interesting, productive, and sometimes tortured history, just issued a statement excoriating that view. So the issue of how expansive do you want to be, in fact, is something that the Black Lives Movement is facing right now.
Okay, do we have any more questions, comments?
I have a question. Okay. If I might. My theory is that DC is a very unique place, not just because we are the place that everybody else comes to address their grievances, but because somehow our city has played a key role. The people of our city has played a key role in social movement throughout history. My theory is that Washingtonians don't get enough credit for what they have done to support every key social movement. Not just at those moments when everybody descended here, but throughout the organizing. So, Washingtonians played a key role in abolition, way ahead of the rest of the country. In, even the anti-apartheid movement and a number of other movements. I'm wondering from everybody else here, do you agree? Do you think that there is something unique to the role of the people of DC beyond the people who come here to march that has pushed forth social movement for all of our country and maybe even, internationally?
I do think, I do know that there are people, when I started out with my activism, who resided right in the nation's capital, because I slept in some of their homes and were entertained by them and attended some of the churches. So there was an active group here. I remember coming to Howard University as we were planning for Freedom Summer in the fall of '63 or early '64. So there has always been a link with the nation's capital, the people who reside here.
That's a very, very good point. There have been a number of very good books written about certain specific incidents, the Snow Riot, et cetera. Certainly during the Civil War, a very activist role in freeing free blacks, et cetera, and being a haven for contraband, that famous word. But also at all times, in many of the demonstrations, the city was extremely welcoming. So at the very least, as hosts, there's been a tremendous thing. Also, the city has been experimented upon as well for social movements. Certain congressional leaders at various times thought that they could try things here. We didn't have much to say about it because we had no voice, no franchise. So indeed, this has been very important, and there have been a number of attempts to talk about this, some documentaries. Mr. Cole back there is doing a documentary about the drive for statehood. So there's a lot going on, both in the written and documentary community, trying to make sure that the role of the district is properly treated.
Well, I think one of the key words for tonight is collective consciousness. That is something that all of our panelists have discussed in various ways, but even this Humanitini event, celebrating 225 years of Washington, D.C.'s history, and these talks that we have monthly are to bring the community involved and create a collective consciousness. So tonight, let's give our panelists, Ms. Dory Ladner, a round of applause. Yeah, make some noise. Ms. Harisa Naruzi, give her a round of applause. And Mr. Glenn Marcus. Now, I promised you some poetry, and so usually at this time I do a poetic summary. Home of the rally and march. Washington, D.C. is a capital city and home to the rally and march. From Coxey's Army to civil rights, Americans have used their voices to play a part and affect change. Protesters, activists, and concerned citizens making something familiar out of at what times seemed something estranged, from the bonus army to streets inhabited by 1 million men. Today we discuss the history from way back then. Times were different, and to effect change, Americans chose their cause, celebrating 225 years of Washington, D.C.'s history. Now that's reason to give this panel applause. Go ahead, you can do it. Because this city has endured wars where bullets fell like rain. And today, Washington, D.C. stands comparably under what seems like a rainbow arch. After knowing and discussing the home of the Rallying March, thank you for joining us for this discussion with meaning, and that completes tonight's Humanitini. Thank you. I'm Dr. Cherie Ward, your moderator. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jay Stewart. Oh, we have one more audience comment. Oh, all right. Come on, Miss Ladner. Lead us in a song.
This little light of mine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All on the Capitol, I'm gonna let it shine. All on the Capitol, I'm gonna let it shine. All on the Capitol, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
That's all right. Let's raise our hands in solidarity and collective consciousness. Power to the people. Jay.
This is anticlimactic, but we have a raffle. So actually, if someone could bring up the ticket. Zara, can you do the honors? Can you reach into the bag and... Okay, so the winning ticket is 550. Right there. Right over there. And that concludes today's Humanitini. I look forward to seeing you all in September.